Hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Tonight, we'll turn our focus to Nigeria's struggling economy, one that continues to grapple with rising inflation, a weakening naira, and a ballooning debt profile. The Tinubu administration, like its predecessors, has turned to institutions such as the World Bank for financial lifelines. But with each new loan, the country sinks deeper into debt, raising serious concerns about long-term economic sustainability. So, what does this mean for Nigeria's future? And how will this borrowing spree impact ordinary citizens already struggling with a high cost of living, job losses, and dwindling purchasing power? And most importantly, is there a viable path to economic recovery without further deepening Nigeria's debt profile? Well, joining me tonight to help us break down this complex conversation is Terfa Abraham. He's an economist and a public affairs commentator. Mr. Abraham, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Compliments of the season. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start this way. Do you share this perspective where every other Nigerian, the moment they hear the government is successfully borrowing something from the World Bank, from IMF, from other international lenders, begin to worry about the future? How concerned are you, or do you share any concern at all with our rising debt profile?
Certainly, our rising debt profile as a country is a concern, especially no debt owed today will be paid today. It's built into the future, 10, 15 years. So certainly, it's a burden for the future. However, the idea behind borrowing is borrowing sustainably, borrowing within sustainable limits. Because generally, every country borrows because it is part of our fiscal policy mix. Every country has revenue that they match with expenditure, but because of demand for social amenities, the demand for government spending is usually higher than the revenue that comes in. So that deficit finance gap is being financed using either borrowing or raising taxes. For a country that's already high in poverty, talking about 133 million with another 4 million likely to be added, tax reform going on, but every effort is meant to expand tax net and not just raising the rate. The option that becomes viable is borrowing. So the concept is borrowing sustainably. So borrowing today so that we can pay in the future without denying the future their own elasticity of growth and development.
And taking into consideration our recent history, let's say from 1999 to date, under the current democratic dispensation, would you characterize our borrowing as sustainable?
The Debt Management Office has debt sustainability plans that helps manage our debt stock, whether total debt stock, that owed by the public, federal, state, local government, everything pulled together, both domestic and foreign. Now the concept is there's the debt sustainability plan pegs our borrowing within certain threshold, debt to GDP, debt to revenue, debt to export. Within this limit, within this debt sustainability threshold, we've exceeded a lot. But in terms of the ongoing reforms that the country is currently going through, and the results that are already being yielded through reduction in inflation, through increase in revenue, our debt to revenue threshold borrowing space is expanding, thereby allowing some space for the government to borrow some more, knowing that with the projection in GDP, in the economy growing, repaying will not be an issue. So like I said in the beginning, borrowing is not the issue, but how to repay. And if you use that, if you look at debt revenue, remember already our 2025 federal government budget has been raised to almost 54 trillion. That was premised on a revenue that is projected to be 40 trillion. That has never been. So anchored on the threshold of debt to revenue, it's likely that even though the government knows that they have to borrow, repaying in the long term will not be an issue. All things being equal, if revenue grows as expected, and the tax reform also yields the economy generally working together to yield that desirable impact on the economy.
I mean, going by the textbook definition of all of the conversations that we're having, or the parameters of the conversation we're having right now, it's safe to say that we're safe. However, there is a Nigerian phenomenon that we have to deal with. So let's talk about the economy itself. How healthy is the Nigerian economy? When you talk about revenue being the key word here, if revenue is up, we don't have to worry about this because then it could offset long term, all of these debts that is accruing to the nation. So how healthy is the Nigerian economy right now? Bearing in mind the inflation figures, what's happening in the private sector, the energy crisis that we're dealing with, and everything else that is supposed to give us a clear picture of what to expect from the Nigerian economy.
Okay, economically, we assess the health of an economy using indicators. For example, real GDP growth, inflation, average exchange rate, crude oil production in terms of quantity and then price. And then there are other indicators as well in terms of debt sustainability. Now, if you look at all these indicators, the most popular one is real GDP growth. That is the indicator that economists worldwide use to measure the health of an economy. Technically, there have been a lot of criticism regarding the use of real GDP. Some people talk about happiness index, some people talk about wealth index, but real GDP remains the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within an economy that is used to assess how that economy is performing as periodically, maybe monthly, quarterly, or yearly. There's another indicator we can use, stock market data that is spilled out on daily basis. If you analyze stock market data, the way it closes, you see that all things being equal or taken together, the stock market has also been closing pulled together on a green, on a positive note. So in terms of health of the economy shows positive indication of growth. Inflation is cooling down. Exchange rates, though high, but it's stable. The target for the Apex Bank, which is the CBN, is not to crash exchange rate from 1,400 today, tomorrow, into 800 naira, which in itself would be an economic abnormality. But the context for monetary policy authorities is to ensure that that exchange rate stays in a stable way, and then exchange interest rate as well that we use to price private sector borrowing is also within a limit that people who borrow can plan within a period. So economic indicators shows that the economy is healthy. However, there's a gap in terms of growth and development. Growth being inclusive means as the economy is growing, how is it helping to reduce poverty, create jobs? There is time lag in how monetary macroeconomic policy works. So economy grows in 3 months to 6 months. It takes some lags based on econometric modeling on how it impacts on health sector or growth. So one answer by economic indicator, the economy is looking healthy. But what to do with the growth that is healthy to ensure that it translates into inclusive development by we require more than just economic policy. To require ensuring stability in the polity, in the economy, avoiding crisis, conflict, and ensuring peace, which is the overall bedrock for development.
Does that explain why for many Nigerians, they do not trust some of the data that's coming out because it does not correlate with their everyday reality? When the numbers are showing a positive outlook, people are saying, well, our situations have not changed. So how come the data is saying things are changing? Okay, great.
The trust on how the people trust government, trust the office of the president, trust the parliament. One thing that makes us economists is ability to analyze using data. There's a database called Afrobarometer, and they measure the trust of the presidency of the National Assembly of Parliament across all African countries. Their current data shows that their current data stops for 2023, not Tinubu's administration, 2023. And you see that even for that data as of 2023, Africans generally don't trust the presidents, their presidents, and they even trust the parliament even less. They even trust local government even lesser. So the context there is that when the people not trusting government, it's not coming from the people not wanting to trust, but the delay in growth indicators translating into development outcome. And the idea there is to ensure that it's important that aside government allowing macroeconomic policies do the magic of creating growth in itself, government needs to become more deliberate. And that is why where there's equilibrium, where the market creates jobs using monetary and fiscal policy, government intervenes physically using social investment programs, so that those people outside the equilibrium, those people who the market cannot create jobs for, those people who are not feeling the impact of the reduction in tomato prices, pepper prices, food prices, government has a way of reaching them through income redistribution policy, which the National Social Investment Program comes in, through subsidies, through other forms of programs that are built in our macroeconomic model in a way that does not distort the overall impact of the reforms. And remember, this is federal government perspective alone. There's room for local government, there's room for state government, which makes it even more painful about why local government governance is not seen to be peaking, despite all the executive order, constitutional provision, presidential declaration on the need for autonomy for the local government. Because until these arms of government pool forces together with the federal government, what people will be saying is growth indicator showing positive signal from the top, which is from the federal level, but the delay to reach the grassroots will always be obvious, and that is where that distrust is coming from.
And you know, when we talk about the Nigerian economy itself, a lot of people say there is a face value to it, obviously from history and everything else, but the current state of the Nigerian economy is one that, you know, inspires mixed feelings, so to say. While there are some positives, there are some concerning developments within the economy, especially regarding sustainability. So talk to me about the recent exercise by the Bureau of Statistics to rebase the GDP, because for some experts like you, this is all in an effort to give the Tinubu administration a lot more room to explore what it can get on the international market. If you rebase your GDP, it looks bigger, it looks healthier. It means you can access a lot more in the international market, whether it's loans or you're trying to bring up a lot more investment inwards. Talk to me about the pros and cons of rebasing the Nigerian GDP.
Okay, GDP is calculated using different formulas. All of them rely on basket of goods. Remember, GDP is the total monetary value of goods, of all goods and services within a particular economy for a particular period. So now prices are changing of goods and services, factor cost changing, the structure that these goods and services operate is changing, taxes changing, government policy changing, the demand and supply dynamics within all this sector is changes over time. Now, based on World Bank recommendation, IMF recommendation, which the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics is part of in terms of that board, that committee whereby they agree to rebase GDP periodically. Nobody imposes it on Nigeria. Our MBS, Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, is part of that council or that board, and they know when to do that based on their own internal regulation and their own understanding of the role of statistics for economic planning. They revise this, they rebase the GDP periodically. Now, when the GDP is rebased, it helps the economy in question to know the exact price or worth of their goods and services. Remember, we measure real GDP growth based on how it grows year on year or quarter on quarter or period on period. So you want to be sure that as you are estimating real GDP growth, you are reporting what actually reflects your economy. So that is what the rebasing does. It changes maybe the base. It changes the base maybe from 2010 to 2018. It just changes the base. Works on certain parameters, LASPEB formula using per share formula. There are some formulas that the statisticians and economists work together to pull together. But remember, the key word, regardless of the technicality, is the real GDP reported 4 years ago. Is that the real GDP we should be using to report Nigerian economy today? And the question is no. So when they rebase, it helps the Nigerian economy to see its real value of growth. Now, the rebasing will also help Nigeria, like you rightly asked, help the external world, the rest of the world, to price Nigeria's worth in terms of GDP. What is Nigeria's real GDP? When last did they rebase? These are questions that international investors ask. Just like credit ratings, also, yes, some ratings like how they rate economies, AA plus or A plus. All these ratings also work with our rebasing to know how to price a country in terms of in which direction. This country, Nigeria, is one country that has been putting out a lot of positive signal to attract foreign investment. But the investors in question are looking at our real GDP, looking at our credit rating, looking at how we are categorized. Remember, there's how countries are categorized. Low middle income country, high middle income country, poor middle income country. All these things are pulled together for investors and big credit players to decide which economy to invest in. So rebasing the economy, our GDP, is good because it helps to assess our economy. It's just like people wanting to marry, and then they ask, have you done your genotype test and just to check for compatibility. It doesn't mean the marriage will hold or not hold, but it helps to at least give the parent an idea that this marriage, if it holds, it's not going in the direction of wrong health, but at least the calculation is within healthy limits.
So do you think those who question the motive behind rebasing the GDP and what it stands to achieve, especially in light of the economic reforms that the Tinubu administration is trying to achieve, they question the sincerity of the exercise as well as the goal it is trying to achieve? Is there a chance that we could be misleading not just ourselves but also the international community about the strength of the Nigerian economy?
Now, see the context. The guys who rebase this, the institutions behind rebasing the GDP are professionals, MBS, CBN, and their partners, IMF, World Bank, field researchers, and the data, the people who actually go to field to collect this data, the people who do the work, the templates used, the format used, the calculation. These are things that are validated. They are created by us. You have a lot of stakeholders being involved. Nigeria Economic Summit Group, many stakeholders who are part of this process and validate this process. So like I said earlier, nobody forces this thing down our throat as a country. It's something that we come together, we put together, we validate, we criticize, academicians review, the academia review, they remove, they bring in, everybody agrees, it is seen, it is simulated and resimulated and seen to reflect our true picture for Nigeria. Now, the idea is not trusting the rebasing should not come up at all, because it's just a technical exercise. It doesn't change the output growth of a tomato farmer or a yam farmer. It's just part of, it's like vitals, like medical doctors, like just body vitals to check your heartbeat, your heart rate, your smart watch advising you when to rest. It doesn't mean you have to rest or you must rest or your food intake has changed. It's just telling you what it is. So that is what the rebasing does. It actually reflects what the economy says. And guess what? The rebasing is also part of what we see playing out, helping us to see how inflation trend is going. Whether Nigerians trust the rebasing or not is totally unconnected to the rebasing.
You think it's immaterial? What?
No, the issue of trust is coming from who they thought, it's coming from political variables, if I can use that language. In other words, how well has the government performed in terms of keeping to its promises and regarding fuel subsidy removal and other issues. That's where it's coming from. But in terms of statisticians, economists doing their rebasing and trusting it, that I don't think.
And is there not a chance that politicians can influence the process to get some sort of outcome that they think that will favor the administration's economic policies? Is it not possible to cook the process in a certain way to make it look?
Rebasing the GDP is very technical. A lot of statistical models, econometry. It's not something politicians want to waste time to. Politicians rather prefer to change or influence the reporting. But remember, once the rebasing is a model, it's in someone's system, it's in someone's laptop. So when you put in these variables, it shows you the figure. So it's not something, what politicians can easily do is to explain away what they think should be the real GDP or real inflation. They can always have time to do that. But what smart technical people do in terms of rebasing, like the MBS represent, the CBN, IMF, World Bank. I'm not giving a green light on all these institutions, but I'm saying there are guys, the team that come together to do this rebasing. It's something that goes through a lot of validation process that cannot be doubted. I can say that. But remember, what is key is that you might rebase your GDP to say that it's growing today 10%. It doesn't mean that the tomato farmer has increased his output. It just reports, it's an health indicator for the economy so that investors can be able to look in the right direction. Remember, this last GDP data that came out, it showed very interestingly that the real sector, the real estate and the rest, is growing far more than people thought it was. It almost overtook some sectors that people never saw it that coming. Now that rebasing has turned the attention of investors to see that, real sector.
There's a market in the real,
Exactly. So that's what rebasing does. So it's not up for political discussion to accept or not to accept. It's just data and what data shows. It's like saying it will rain today. It doesn't mean it will rain cat and dog. But then it drizzles and then you hear it helps you guide how you should dress. You may not even go out at all and may not care about the rain, but it doesn't change that rebasing exercise, the validity of it.
Let's go back to the comments you made earlier about credit ratings and how that helps even lenders, for instance, assess how much you can get or whether you're a risk or not. Right now, just credit worthiness has been evaluated by a lot of these major international rating agencies, like Fitch Ratings, for instance, affirms Nigeria at a B with a positive outlook. We know a B is like junk status, high risks there, but they see a positive outlook. Standard & Poor's, the S&P, maintains a B rating with a stable outlook, right? Moody's Investors Service rates Nigeria a CAA1 with a positive outlook. It's safe to say that, listen, there's still some room there. You can still give Nigeria some money. However, there are some concerns. Even though the concerns are not necessarily obvious, there's still some positives out there. To Nigerians who think that the Tinubu administration, like the Buhari administration, for instance, is only adding a lot more burden, over leveraging our assets, for instance, to get some of these loans that would take away a significant chunk of our financing for the budget year on year. What do you have to tell them to, to serve as a caveat, so to say, listen, you can be suspicious, cautiously suspicious of these borrowings. However, there is nothing to worry about. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. All those are the assessment for the ratings. Recall, a central word for the three of them that you pull together is positive, stable, positive
outlook.
So positive outlook. So what I would like to say to Nigerians is that let us see macroeconomic indicators as signal for investment. When you hear that there's inflation and food inflation is driving overall inflation, what that means economically is that there is food supply shortage. The demand for food is more than supply for food. So the food inflation is coming because there's a gap. There's an aggregate demand gap for food. Yes, there are other control variables like insecurity, climate change, unstable rainfall patterns, energy cost, price of farm inputs, access to challenges smallholder women farmers face, access to land. All these are control variables, but the central thing there is that it signals, first of all, that there's shortage of food supply. The demand for food is more than the supply. So for Nigerians, that's a signal that there's room for investment in the food sector. So when you see also that real GDP is for the last quarter grew, and these are the sectors that the growth came from, it also signals investment. So the concept is this. Our Nigerian economy, including the stock market, spills out daily positive data or periodic data that signals domestic and foreign investors, especially domestic Nigerian investors, where they should invest. But nobody, if I can generalize loosely, is taking advantage of the investment gap that the economic indicators show. What they see rather is to use it to push on the demand side. So in other words, what we have now is that we're having a lot of our consumer investor balance as a country is something that existing investment signal is not helping. So it's important for banks to go back to the real business of banking, making credit available for people who have business to do and require loan to get these things to be done. Loans that are within ethical and tolerable limits, that repaying will not be something that wipes out somebody's morals or ethics or wipes out somebody's capital. Already recall, one thing the Tinubu administration wants is that already inflation is cooling down. The tax reform is already...
Is it?
Yeah, in terms of data, because this is an economic session, it's data. You look at the data, it's showing that the inflation is dropping from 30 to 24, it's dropping. But like I said earlier, and like you rightly asked, it does not mean that the person who sold a basket of tomato last night for 4,000 will the next day morning reduce it to 2,008. Because of his own supply chain dynamics, that person needs to clear the last goods that came in, and then, and that is why local and state government needs to come in. If this inflation data gives this signal, government can come in to buy from farmers or sellers their old stock and use and turn it around into social investment program, so that those ones can go to market with new funds to buy what they can buy, restock, and then sell. But when a farmer is struggling to sell last in supply of yams using old prices, even if the price of yam reduced today, the person wants to clear today's own. So there's room for commodity board to come back. There's need for everyone to just come together, especially coordinating our national social investment program to ensure that what we actually use in Empower, in homegrown school feeding program, what we actually use are things farmed by Nigerian farmers and not these manufactured packaged goods that we see. People are not buying from farmers. And until you buy from the tomatoes farmer, yam farmer, and all these people who need our purchase, no matter how the inflation drops, they will not feel it.
All right, let's have a quick listen to the CNC, who had something to say about Nigeria's inflation coming down when, for the most part, many people across several states that Nigerians have been speaking to, this particular development say, listen, we don't feel it yet. I mean, some of the traders have also said, listen, while we acknowledge that there is a 50, 100 naira, 200 naira drop, a lot of the marginal decline in inflation when it comes to food inflation, for instance, might not necessarily be felt by the end users. So before we get to that video, let's just do a little time travel, right? Look back at what it was like under the Obasanjo administration, who, by the way, secured that debt relief that pretty much gave Nigeria a clean slate. And of course, approximately 36 billion naira through negotiations were wiped out as a result of that. But of course, it was a major success for the administration, and our external debt fell by about $28 billion to just 3.5 billion. This was back in the early 2000s, right? Well, what happened next under President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua? Well, he was in charge for about 2 years. His tenure was marked by conservative fiscal policies, and there wasn't significant borrowing or repayment during this particular time. Then came the Goodluck administration. Debt increased significantly during this time, and the government borrowed for various projects and programs, including infrastructure development. The debt grew from about $3.5 billion in 2010 to around $10 billion, right, by the end of his tenure in 2015. Of course, the administration faced concerns regarding fiscal management and corruption. We all know it. Subsidy and all of that can also be attributed to this one. Then came the Buhari administration, and, safe to say that hell broke loose, right? It went from 10.4 billion in 2015 to around $40 billion by the end of his tenure in 2023. Now, the government's heavy borrowing strategy was aimed at funding infrastructure and economic recovery projects, but the repayment of these loans were quite limited. And this is what the Tinubu administration inherited. Quite a messy situation where you can see debt servicing eating a huge chunk of our budget year on year. So, looking at our history, right, it's safe to say that we're not heading in the right direction. Even though borrowing is inevitable, if we have to develop our economy, if we have to develop our infrastructure, if we have to fund some of these projects that would stimulate economic growth and development, what would be the cautious step for the Tinubu administration, especially looking at what they have been borrowing for so far?
Very good rundown there. If you look at it, it's important to be fair to President Obasanjo, Yar'Adua, Goodluck, Buhari, and Tinubu now. As economists, we see government is a continuum. The benefit of an economic policy cannot be put on one president alone. For example, see where we are with telecoms. It started with simple deregulation from Obasanjo, but all governments have contributed to bringing it to where we are today. So why I gave that example is for you to understand that when it comes to our borrowing and debt profile, Obasanjo's time, remember, we're just coming back to the Fourth Republic. So there were a lot of reforms. EFCC Act, Public Procurement Act, Fiscal Responsibility Act, a lot of reforms that helped. So that the concept there was that it was important to see Nigeria to resume its right of place as the giant of Africa. So Obasanjo really gathered that goodwill. And one thing that was clear was that there was a strong, in the academic literature, correlation between poverty and debt. Huge. In fact, what was common that time was highly indebted poor countries, HIPC. It was a very common phenomenon back then. So it was common or agreed that debt forgiveness or debt reduction has a positive correlation with poverty reduction and development. So Obasanjo's team, don't forget, the Konjo Whalers, the Soludos, were part of these people working with the global international community to attain or achieve debt reduction. Economically, we must commend Obasanjo for that brilliant work. Now, but remember, in between Yar'Adua from 2007 to 2010, remember there were a lot of conflict in the oil production region that affected crude oil production. And remember, as part of our budgeting framework, crude oil production in terms of quantity is a very vital assumption that we use to premise our budget. So Yar'Adua could not watch that kind of insecurity going on without doing anything. So by the time you look at everything that needs to be done, you needed to borrow to do some things. So, and that was what Jonathan inherited. Now, from Jonathan's time, 2010 to 2015, remember, in between 2008 and 2009, there was a global financial crisis, which is why we economists take structure of the Nigerian economy or structure of the global economy or the interrelation between sectors globally very vital. So the global financial crisis of 2008 to 2009 affected Nigerian economy, the stock market, and many other sectors. So many countries funded their research. Remember, in recession, government spending must be expansionary, subsidy will increase. Remember, that was when there was a shopping and the rest. So government borrows to do these things. And then they moved over to, but then between 2010 and 2014, there was increase in crude oil price. But then that was when Nigeria had the challenge of not saving. Remember the back and forth between Oshomele, Konjo-Iweala, and governors. So that was where that issue came from in terms of now crude oil prices have gone above 100. Why are we not saving? But then that was why the battles changed politically anyway in 2015. Then remember 2015, as we entered 2015, 2016 there was recession. Where our GDP went to negative. Yeah. 2020 again there was recession. So before Buhari could wake up from SIP, Strategic Investment Plan for 2016, and built the Economic Recovery Growth Plan 2017 to 2020, it was affected by the 2016 recession and 2020 recession driven by COVID. So you look back and left before you know, these things did not mean that health sector would not require increase in funding, education and other sectors. All social proposed sectors will still need more funding. So the issue is that the borrowing as at that time could be assessed as not being sustainable or poorly incurred. But what is important is that today we now, like rightly said, that was the debt the Tinubu's administration inherited. And with that resilient, that's why the Tinubu administration started with the reform, even though we've all agreed that first subsidies gone was a rush. You see the consistency in ensuring reforms continue, like the swing tax reform, saying no to going back to subsidies and all these things. But the concept here is that so long as it is, we anchor our economy on reforms, we must wait for reforms to begin to yield positive feedback before we can have any revenue. Right now, it has seen our revenue grow to 40 trillion, where we can use to plan a budget of 54 trillion. However, that is still far less compared to the gap in infrastructure that we need to finance. Look at housing, road, social infrastructure, student loan, women farming, youth, a lot of sectors, armed forces, dilapidated structures for police, and just everywhere. Right. So these things just means more borrowing. We keep coming. So what is important is to ensure that for every borrowing we get, we tie it to a very clear project that is out there, and the budget office of the Federation publishes projects that the government intends to fund using bilateral and multilateral loans, and they upload these things on their website. So it's important that Nigerians understand how to follow what government is doing, and at the same time, government should listen to the people to determine which project to take priority, and not just planning from top bottom, but rather allowing this citizen participation or needs assessment of the people to determine what government should be doing. We all know that the country requires more money than we have now. However, what government is prioritizing now, is that what the people want? So it's important to improve that citizens' interaction with the government, so that whatever the government is doing is informed by needs assessment of the people, and not just what government thinks they should be doing for the people.
Right. There's always a wisdom in this saying that you should cut your clothes according to your cloth, right? Measure twice, cut once. When it comes to borrowing, for instance, the past Minister of Finance under the Buhari administration, when the public outcry was getting to the administration, said, listen, as far as the international, globally recognized standard of debt to GDP ratio is concerned, Nigeria is well below 50%, so there is nothing to worry about. People are just making a big deal out of this thing. But is there a line that needs to be drawn, especially considering the resources we might need for the future, right? So that we don't mortgage the future, as the saying goes. Where is the line? Where's the red line that you think, whether it's the Tinubu administration or the next administration, needs to draw and say, listen, we have to figure this out, and borrowing isn't the way to go about it continuously?
That line has to be returning to development planning, proper national development plan. What Nigeria lacks even now is a proper long-term national development plan of 10 to 15 years. That's where the line is not being drawn. What we have, remember, we had the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015. Many countries didn't achieve the target, so it was revised. Now we have Sustainable Development Goal 2015 to 2030. We are all working towards it, achieving in some, failing in many others. However, there's a framework to measure our journey in terms of where we should be in the future. What we have for Nigeria right now, we are still running Buhari's National Development Plan 2021 to 2025, which elapsed this year. Then we have the Tinubu's Renewed Hope Agenda, which is also, if you Google the Renewed Hope Agenda, even this evening, what comes out is Renewed Hope Agenda under the APC banner. There's need to turn that Renewed Hope Agenda into a strategic plan, a short-term plan that the government can own. Already, as budget analysts, we know already that 2025 budget has a lot of projects captioned Renewed Hope Agenda project in livestock, in many sectors. We know. But it's important to make that document have the outlook it should have, which is a medium-term development plan. The other one is the medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper, which is something that is an offshoot of the Fiscal Responsibility Act as a result of the budget process. So where I'm going is that aside the Renewed Hope Agenda and aside the Sustainable Development Plan, what plan does Nigeria have now that it can call long-term development plan for 10 to 15 years? We need to go back to that plan. It's in that plan that we can have clear revenue projection, clear expenditure projection, clear deficit financing, gap financing, including the implication for domestic and external, the kind of loan we should be tolerating. For every economic choice we make, for every growth we seek to attain, if Nigeria seeks to grow by 6%, there's a level of inflation we must tolerate, and there's a level of borrowing we must tolerate. But without a plan, there's nowhere we can say these things and analyze. So it's important for the President Tinubu administration to take a step further to ensure that Nigeria returns to or have a proper documented long-term development plan where you can download and see, Google and touch, and every MDA, just like we have under Obasanjo, from LEADS, Local Government Economic Empowerment Development Strategy, to SEEDS, State Economic Empowerment Development Strategy, to NEEDS, National Economic, that kind of thinking. The government needs to go further to ensure that we have a renewed hope agenda that is tied to a long-term development, working together with the Sustainable Development Goal. Remember, the SDG is 2030. 2030 minus today, 2050 is 5 years. So in itself, it's becoming a medium term in terms of perspective. So Nigeria needs a long-term development plan where it will let us know that for every borrowing choice, this is the debt limit to tolerate for this period, this is the level of inflation to tolerate, this is the kind of growth we can get. So that line will not be blurred in terms of borrowing to meet today's needs without denying people's future. And another word, in terms of where to draw the line, in terms of borrowing, no borrowing should deny the children of today a better future. You don't borrow away your resources by including wiping out your forest reserve and just destroying the environment. Whatever we do it sustainably, so that whatever the people today are consuming, the people for 50 years, 100 years can still consume without both generations from time travel affecting each other's equilibrium of having that same consumption.
Yeah, and I suppose the whole conversation around a lack of an implementable development plan explains why the future looks like a mirage and why the successive governments have focused mainly on the next 2-3 years and perhaps appears to be oblivious of what may come next. But talk to me about the 2025 budget. The current, as we have it, debt servicing is going to go up about 14.3 trillion naira. Budget deficit is around 13 or so trillion. Now, it's safe to say that Nigeria is broke on paper when it comes to financing this 54.9 trillion naira budget. Talk to me about what other alternatives are there, away from just borrowing and servicing these debts with these monies that we cannot afford. What other alternatives are on the table? Is this what every other government does when they're broke?
Borrowing to finance deficits is part of classic economic thinking. So long as revenue is not matching expenditure, there's a finance gap. See, revenue minus expenditure. Our revenue for 2025 is projected to be around 40 trillion, which is why you were saying deficit of around 13, 14. That's where it came from. Yeah. Revenue projected to be 40 trillion, then expenditure projected to be around 54 point something trillion. 40 minus 54 gives you that minus 14. 14, that is deficit gap. That deficit will be financed through borrowing, domestic and externally, or through sale of assets, or some other sources. including all these cash swaps, crude oil, for all those kind of innovation around borrowing through bonds, innovation around capital market, and many other points. Now, the concept is this. Although the deficit gap of around 14 trillion is high in terms of size, it is still within our threshold, our sustainability limit as recommended by Fiscal Responsibility Act. Although it says about 3%, but it allows room for the country to be able to increase it where the financing, the deficit has become necessary to meet needs.
Mr. Terfa, do we have to worry about this nominal increase, right, when it comes to deficit financing, for instance? Because year on year, it seems to be increasing. And it looks to the outsider, for people like, average Nigerians, to say, well, you keep shifting the goalposts just to explain why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, that's a brilliant question, but the answer there is beyond government. It needs civil society organizations, National Assembly, to work with the executive arm of government to ensure effective budget implementation. Remember, all those budget passages from the preparation to enactment. Now, the implementation, if ministries, departments, and agencies show that their budget for 2026 require more than they present for 2025, what can the government do? The idea is to ensure that those ministries, departments, and agencies, their budget implementation is well scrutinized to be sure that whatever they are requesting for as funding needs is not exaggerated. And that falls on the National Assembly to ensure effective oversight. And that also falls on civil society organizations to partner with whoever they want to partner with to ensure that MDAs are implementing the budget as provided. Because now remember, in the budget, you see some projects as new, but ongoing. After a while, you see them new again, depending on how they are calculated. Now, if the idea is that a sector like education that has a lot of funding requirement, after a period, say 5-10 years, the funding requirement for the education sector should decline, should drop, because those needs have been met. But whereby we start funding a sector 1 year, then we stop, we go back and forth, there's variation, there's exchange rate, there's high contractor debt build-up. These are the things that affect our budget size. So we need to take budget implementation more seriously and to ensure that the people implementing are implementing it effectively, so that when the project is completed, we know that it's completed, and not delaying in terms of budget has been passed, but you delay releases, you delay the cash back. The utilization is also affected by political issues within the local government or area where the budget should be implemented. Before 6 months is gone, there's a gap between procurement process and appropriation process. So the 4 billion appropriated to the contractor has now changed because of exchange rate inflation variation. So that person can no longer complete that project because of the 4 billion is now less. So these are the technicalities around. So we must take more seriously budget implementation to ensure that budgets are projects, and every project must start and end. Just it's normal, like like we do in project cycle. Every Gantt chart, you start and end. A project, both projects and programs and activities should be well planned, and their financing model followed very strictly, so that this issue of back and forth will not arise as a result of delay in project implementation. Because if there's delay, they have to come back again to the next year's budget, and it will be priced even higher. So you see budget going up, the size of budget going up, but project completion is declining, and abandoned project even increasing, and people are not seeing the impact of the projects that are supposed to be financed through government budget.
And in talking about the health status of the Nigerian economy, right? We all know how petrol, for instance, has become like part of the nervous system. Anything that happens to petrol prices would definitely destabilize whatever economic arrangement households, businesses make regarding energy cost and its attendant effect to the general economy. Talk to me about some of the deals that we've made. I did earlier on ask a question about leveraging our assets or over leveraging some of our assets, right? As the quote-unquote mono economy that we are in terms of revenue generation, we heavily depend on a good market for crude oil at the global market, right? There is a concern right now about renegotiating or negotiating the Naira for crude swap, which we know is going to be very central for energy stability, price stability at least, with Dangote and the other refineries depending heavily on the NNPCL to provide them with feedstock, right? Talk to me about how a situation like that can best be managed as some of the low-hanging fruits, because we also understand that there are contractual agreements where the NNPC has to give out these feedstock to an already agreed partner who is going to take the crude oil, for instance, and that leaves the NNPCL with very limited options to provide feedstock to Dangote and the rest. And if Dangote and the rest have to import their feedstock from the international market, it means we're going to see prices go up. The Petron is talking about paying above 1,000, and this is just a few months when Nigerians thought, oh, what a sigh of relief. Talk to me about some of these issues that we need to sort out domestically to address some key economic variables.
Well, the idea is very straightforward. The feedstock you're referring to is crude. It's crude. Because crude is the major input that any refinery turns into product. And so the NNPC and what Dangote, what they are doing in the sector is just to ensure that we have a sector that is more open and more that is gradually being deregulated and liberalized. Remember, many people have said if we don't kill NNPC will kill us. Nobody had the guts to do it until Tinubu came on board. Now Dangote is now producing, now selling. For some period, you even heard how the price war between filling stations that buy from Dangote and the one that NNPC supply. For the Nigerian consumer, that's what we want. Competition that will drive prices down. However, we cannot ignore the costs investors incur. Dangote as an investor and NNPC as an investor. Once you begin to ignore the cost these people incur, you are threatening the survival of their businesses. Remember, NNPC represents the interest of Nigeria, just as Dangote also represents the interest of Nigeria. So what we don't want is two of them entering a market situation where survival becomes difficult. So the government must still continue to pay attention to what Dangote is saying in terms of the market of the oil sector and what NNPC is saying. But what is healthy for us as Nigerian consumers is to see prices go down. However, we don't want prices that will be so low to the extent that selling in the Nigerian market becomes even unattractive, whereby now that will now lead us to a situation whereby rather than individual smuggling, you now have these big players themselves finding alternative market to sell. So it's important to pay attention to the issue of who buys what, who gets what, so that everybody produces in a way that fits their production model. Recall again that crude oil price and quantity is part of our budget benchmark. So it's important that while we are looking at the, in terms of price, we also pay attention to the production, the crisis in the unrest, seemingly unrest in the oil producing region of the country. It's not a good one. It's something that the government needs to work on to ensure that it tames it and calms it in a most inclusive and considerable manner as possible, in the best way possible, so that it will become more volatile and to help Nigeria attain its crude oil production target, while the price that we can't control depends on the international market. We just tag along with what we have.
All right. Now let's zoom out a little bit and focus on everything economics under the Tinubu administration. The tax reform bills that would soon become an act, because I think the Senate would do the needful, as you can expect. The president always gets his way anyway with the National Assembly. They're always in lockstep, right? Give me a sense of whether, based on the estimations and the expectations, things are going according to plan for the Tinubu administration, at least. For Nigerians, I think the verdict is out. Things are not going according to what Nigerians expect to happen. But what of the administration? Do you think the administration is getting its way when it comes to the economic reforms that it's trying to implement?
GDP figures say so. Inflation figures say so. Revenue being generated say so. However, the delay in people feeling this impact is where the challenge is. And for that to happen, which should be happening very soon, which is happening already, we don't need distraction. The government does not need any distraction from any place. Disruption in crude oil production, not needed. Insecurity, not needed. So all this kidnapping, killing, all not needed. So the government needs to be an all-out approach to ensure that economic reforms translate to positive good for the people. So in terms of this economic indicator, I can say that the government is happy with what the indicators are showing. Now, in terms of the tax reform, remember, the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform is beyond tax reform, even though we call it tax reform. It's more, first of all, it's for the economy. removing all hurdles to ensure that the economy operates smoothly. Is when the economy grows, as we have repeated severally, that businesses can now pay tax.
Taxing prosperity.
Exactly. Exactly. Economy growing, jobs being created, goods and services moving from one point to the other. Then as people are prospering, government can now say, okay, from who is prospering, give us a little here so we can provide better road, better amenities. So that is the context. So even though the House has passed the bill and they reduced the VAT at 7.5%, the concept is this. The VAT that has been kept on 7.5% will still benefit those who consume luxury goods. The poor, people who consume non-processed goods, will not in any way feel it. So keeping the value added tax at 7.5%, you are just benefiting the people who consume luxury, people who eat rice in very big 5-star hotel rather than in the mama put where the poor, low-income people eat. So it would have been important if that value added tax was allowed to at least maybe even 10%, because it will bring revenue from consumption of luxury goods that can be now shared across the 36 states and FCT to help meet the needs of even the low-income income earners. So I wish that the Senate will also pass the bill, but stay on maybe 10% on VAT, and then maybe they reconcile during conference committee, and let's just see how it goes. Because remember, that VAT that you are keeping at 7.5%, I repeat, we benefit high-income earners and not the poor people or low-income earners that we think we are producing. But generally, it is part of the reform that will help Nigeria grow in terms of economy, improve its revenue, and also create jobs.
Interesting conversation there. Thank you so much, Mr. Terfa Abraham. Appreciate you as always for providing us with that expert analysis. And of course, with that, we wrap things up for tonight's edition of the program. Thank you most kindly for joining us. Daily Politics returns tomorrow live at 8 p.m. Until next time, I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Good evening.